Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 50, and we're going to talk about how the United States is now considering a limited draft. What the fudge, right? And we're going to use Ukraine as a case study. Just remember, you can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Rumble, and YouTube, in case where you're listening to it now is inconvenient to you. There are plenty of alternatives. Okay, so I was scrolling around and I saw this article a few days ago, and it turns out I made a Facebook post about it, but I didn't make an episode about it. And I saw my wife was listening to someone talking about it, and I thought, well, I have things to say about it, so I'm going to make an episode about it as well. So if you go to military.com, and I guess you type in limited military draft, this article will come up. But the substance of the article, and it's not that long, it's very brief, is basically that after decades of constant war, the U.S. military needs to change how it replenishes its ranks, right? So at the present moment, it is an all-volunteer military. That is, you sign up, no one forces you. Although, and I think I mentioned this before, there are a lot of soldiers who are currently in the military who are given the choice by a judge, either go to prison or join the military. And a lot of them join the military. So if that's voluntary, okay, perhaps in the broadest sense of the term. So in contrast to volunteering to be in the military, you're conscripted, you're drafted. In other words, you are forced to be in the military. And obviously, we reject coercion. So this is clearly going to be a bad idea. The direction of this episode, where it's going to go. Anyway, so the plan is this, right? So the person who wrote this article, and he was like some kind of colonel or something, retired, I guess. And what he wrote was that recruiters will recruit for 11 months out of the year. And then in the final month, if they don't make their recruitment quotas, right, how many they're supposed to recruit, then in that last month, they're going to draft, however many they need to draft until they, in order to reach their recruitment quota for that year. Okay. And by doing this, you alleviate the pressure of that's on the recruiters to get people to sign up. And I don't know if you've heard any of the stories or seen TV shows that talk about recruiters. There was an NCIS episode that I watched, I think it was in season 1 or 2, where a Marine recruiter was shot, right? And so basically the whole story is about who's shooting Marine recruiters, that kind of thing. But anyway, there's a lot of pressure. And so sometimes, at least the way the embellishment of Hollywood is that sometimes promises are made which cannot be kept for the people who sign up. So a lot of people think they're signing up, they're going to be flying fighters off an aircraft carrier, but actually they're part of the catapult crew, which is one of the worst jobs on an aircraft carrier, or so some people will say, in case there's someone who loved it out there. But anyway, so it relieves the pressure from the recruiters. They can be more honest and probably less stressed about meeting their quotas. And also he adds that another advantage is that we prevent open-ended wars like we have right now by unaccountable senior leaders, because people might be called up, right? And so if there is a draft component in the military, then many more people will be concerned about the never-ending wars, undeclared wars, secret wars, U.S. troops stationed where there are wars, right? This whole phenomena will be sort of not as easy to pull off because you have all these people being forced into the military. Their families are going to be upset. And so they're going to complain to their legislators, the people in Congress, and then, it'll be bad press. All right. So why are we talking about it? Because the draft was abolished in 1973 with the help of Milton, I'm too sexy for my shirt, Friedman, right, who's a free market guy. One of the guys that actually the person who introduced me, not personally, obviously, but through his book, to the free market. And so big fan, but he does have problems in his economic theory, right? He's Chicago School of Economics, and I subscribe to the Austrian school. There are some significant differences, but then a lot of people don't like the Austrian school either. So anyway, so the downside of the draft is that it's coercive, but by having a volunteer force, most of the people who are volunteering come from the lower income portion of society. So not necessarily the officer corps, but the enlisted, right? So so your privates, corporals, sergeants, right? Sailors. These people are generally of the lower income strata, like their families are lower income, okay? And so then you begin to have generational military families, right? And some people call it the warrior caste. So it's not unusual to see, 3 generations of people who served in the military. So it becomes a big tradition. I don't know. I've met some students like that. And it's a pretty big deal. Also, recruiting is affected by unemployment. And so as unemployment levels go down, it's harder to recruit people because they have viable job alternatives, right? And once you're in, it's hard to get out until you're done your tour of duty, right? So basically, the writer was saying that because we have a strong economy now, unemployment is really, really low. And so it's really hard to meet recruitment quotas, right? Recruitment goals. Yeah, right. And we'll talk about that in a moment. I mean, but seriously, we don't have a strong economy, and there's no consideration of the fact that people are being sent to Europe in preparation for a war against Russia, or sent to Australia in preparation for a war against China. I mean, who really wants to be first in on that action if you have a choice, right? And so that might also have an effect on recruiting quotas. So is this bringing back a mixed military, right? Partially volunteer, partially drafted. Is this a good idea? And well, and this is, the article is done, and this is just me talking now. But hopefully, one might think that if we bring the draft, then it would silence all those virtue signalers, right? All those people who are all rah-rah war, but they only are really big supporters of war because they know they will never, ever see the battlefield. And we're talking about the United States here, right? North and South America in particular are unusual because of the separation of these large oceans. And so to launch an amphibious invasion, right, to hit America right now, as of right now, this moment, is not so feasible by any other country. I mean, they can bomb us, but invasion, no, not really. So because of that privilege of being separated by an ocean from all these other countries, there are a lot of virtue signalers here, right? It's like, oh yeah, the war is good. Oh, you're a Putin lover. Oh, they say all these things, right? And they can say anything they want because they know that the probability of them going to have to fight in the battlefield is very, very low. I had an idea of taking a lot of those people who love to burn down buildings and protests, right? Stores and all that other kind of stuff. Why not send them, right? They love the destruction and mayhem. Why not do it against bad people instead of innocent or basically people who are trying to make a living here in this country. I think you know who I'm talking about. Anyway, maybe another advantage of having conscription, right, draft, or even just a partial draft, is that maybe the United States will declare a war now instead of using some kind of weird legislative trick to send U.S. troops into a war zone. I don't know if you realize this, but there's a lot of bending of rules now. And because it's the government that's exploiting loopholes, right, and creating loopholes, it's very bad for the rest of us. So, for example, the National Guard. The National Guard was never meant to be sent overseas. The National Guard is meant for protecting America, right? Because the U.S. military, I think I read somewhere, or maybe it's just the CIA, they used to not be allowed to operate here in the United States, right? Because you don't want like a Syria situation where the president orders U.S. troops to shoot on American people. You don't want that, and so you have a National Guard to fulfill national defense here on this soil. But of course, the politicians said, "Oh, but sending them overseas protects America," and so National Guard members who never dreamed when they signed up that they were going to be sent overseas were sent overseas, right? Even the Coast Guard is sent overseas because since the military is stationed in some place in the Middle East, then those coastal waters now is protecting American interests. They do all these shenanigans, right, to basically promote war. So anyway, so maybe with clear objectives, the U.S. government wouldn't be able to do this anymore, and it wouldn't leave the United States defenseless. All right, well, what about, is it a bad idea? If we really had a good economy, then there wouldn't be wars to fight, and people would have viable alternatives to risking life and limb in a war. We already talked about how wars bankrupt countries. Sun Tzu reminded us of this in The Art of War, right? Financing a war is extremely expensive, not only because of the destruction and then having to make and then buy all these weapons from these contractors, but you're also diverting a lot of energy from building something, I don't know, like a bullet train. And instead of doing that, we're building bombers, or we're building rockets that only have a single use, right? You can only use it once and then it's gone. And it's so expensive. That's why we have to borrow lots of money. And that's why we have over $30 trillion debt. And that's not even including all the unfunded liabilities like Social Security, Medicare. If you take all that into consideration, we're $200 trillion in the hole in debt, and there's no coming back from that, believe me. We talked about this more in episode 42, and the United States has run out of ammunition, right? And so the military budget is as big as it is, even without wartime production levels, right? Producing all the bullets and the bombs, training all the troops, right? Even without that, the U.S. military budget is so bloated. I've had students ask me, where are all the jobs? You say there are alternatives. Where are the jobs? Well, they've been taxed out of the country, right? So when governments, particularly local governments, when they tax the businesses in their city, it becomes easier for those businesses, right? Because the margins are so thin that they move out of the city. They just move outside of the city. And so the city is deprived of their tax revenue. And so what they have to do is they have to raise taxes even more on whoever's left, right? And they eventually leave, and that's how a city dies, right? Well, now the state sees all these companies in their state, and they raise taxes on them to buy votes from all of their constituents. And so what do? They move to a different state. But what if the federal government starts imposing all these laws? Well, then they have to leave the country. And when they leave one area for another, they take with them all of those jobs. And so all these good jobs that used to be available to people, yeah, they're gone, right? And it's because people keep raising taxes. That's a kind of a very simple presentation of how that works. but there it is. So if we just so taxes go up to support government spending, including the military. So if we cut taxes, then all the corporations and the jobs come back. And so why would anyone join the military and risk dying when you can just get a good job? Also, the idea by this colonel is a giant moral hazard. He says, we'll recruit heavily for 11 months, and then whatever we can't recruit, we'll just, draft in the one remaining month. Yeah, well, see, think about this. If we are in a hot war, right, no one is going to volunteer, or only a handful of people are going to volunteer. They're all going to basically hold their breath and hope that they're not drafted in that last month, because really, who wants to go die in a war, right? And if you have not seen any of the frontline videos coming out of Ukraine, you have to find them, right? If you go on Twitter, or what's X now, there are certain handles there that all they do is upload battlefield videos, and it is freaking gruesome. I mean, when you have 300 to 350,000 soldiers of your army dead, right? That's just the dead. And then you have tens of thousands of soldiers who've lost at least one limb. The videos are going to be pretty bloody, really horrible. And that's what people are supporting, the continued killing, maiming, destruction. That's what they're supporting. Oh, by the way, since the Ukraine started using cluster bombs, Russia started using cluster bombs too, which basically means that they weren't using them before. But now that they're using them, even more Ukrainians are dying. So there's that. So the moral hazard is that, well, no one's going to want to get in on that action. And so everyone's going to be waiting for the draft. And so it won't be 1 month of draft. It'll be 11 months of draft and 1 month of volunteering. That's how it always happens, right? So even the income tax was called the victory tax and was supposed to be temporary for World War II. World War II ended, but we still have the income tax, right? And that's how the government does it, right? Anyway, so how's it going in Ukraine now? Slava Ukraine, I think that's what some people say, right? Glory to Ukraine. Well, there are press gangs, right? And I know what press gangs are because I was into, 18th century British naval literature, but no one wanted to go on boats for 3 years at a time, never see their family, and probably die before they ever see them again. So people had to literally kidnap people to make them sailors on their ships. Even if you've never been on a boat in your life, they make you a landsman. And so you can do some of the more menial tasks on the boat, right? And you're stuck there for like a year to 3 years. Anyway, so there are press gangs in Ukraine just grabbing people off of the street if you look like you're a healthy young person, but they stay away from the wealthy neighborhoods. And so they're only pressing people from the lower income part of society. And then they train them for 2 weeks. I saw this one video, a captured Ukrainian soldier. He said, they took me off the street, they trained me for 2 weeks, allowed me to shoot 30 bullets, and then I was on the front line. And he saw a flyer that said, basically showed him how to surrender to the Russians without getting shot. And the first chance he had, he did it. He surrendered, right? I saw another video of a Ukrainian soldier. He surrendered, but he followed exactly what he was supposed to do. But he was a munitions truck driver. And so he brought over anti-aircraft missiles, right, that he was supposed to deliver to Ukrainian units, but he gave them to the Russians instead, right? That's how bad it is over there. So we're giving money to the Ukrainians for them to press people into service so that they die on the battlefield. But a lot of them are surrendering. I've seen so many videos of Ukrainian soldiers. I mean, I would surrender if I only got 2 weeks of training and I'm going up against battle-hardened Russian soldiers, right, who I can't even see because they're all using satellite. Screw that. I'm surrendering, right? The Russians treat them very well, right? The side that is, for the most part, And so Ukrainians kill more Russian prisoners than the Russians are killing Ukrainians. And that's because they see the end of the war. If you don't believe me, there's a look up Gonzalo Lira. Here's a U.S. reporter arrested for not towing the line. He's a U.S. Chilean reporter. He's been tortured, and Biden administration was asked about him, and they did nothing. They denied even knowing anything about it. And instead, they demanded the release of the deposed puppet of Niger, right? Mohamed Bazoum. He's a puppet, right? And he's the one that is allowing Western countries to come in and basically rape that country, take out all of its valuable mineral deposits, including uranium, right? But there was a coup in there, right? A coup d'etat. And so they ousted the puppet. They installed their own junta, a military government. And now the West is threatening war with Niger because they want that uranium, right? Even more so, I read an article about it from ABC News website, and all they talked about was how we have to uphold democracy. Sounds familiar, right? And Russia might be able to cozy up to that new government, so we have to destroy them. It's all for the uranium, not one mention of the uranium, right? But all this crap about democracy. Yeah, as if, right? That's why we have to, right, have a war to protect democracy. Yeah, I'm not buying it. So are you eager to fight in something that you have no interest in, right? To fight the wars of a corrupt government? I don't know, maybe you are. But the alternative is to end all the wars, right? I mean, go back to episode 42. We are so not ready for a real war. You know, the US is going to get spanked, right? I mean, they're recruiting not for killing, they're recruiting for political correctness. That does not make a strong military. And so if you're going to have a military, right, full of people who are exempt from fighting, well, I think you should probably seek peace, end all of the wars. You know, instead of betraying people, installing your own puppet as their government, so that you can come in with corrupt business people and then just steal that country blind. You know, if that's not what you want to do, then you treat them with respect, right? You don't betray them. I mean, look how unjust our government is, going after one person, even making up, you know, and trumping up really, you know, minor charges so that you can throw them in prison, so that the leading competitor against your candidate is in jail and can't run against him anymore, while the sitting president, it's widely known that he was taking bribes, millions of dollars in bribes, and he's still president. Right? So there's no justice here. If there's no justice here, then definitely there's no justice abroad. Like, it used to be that the government would pretend, at least give the appearance that there's justice at home, and therefore people assume that they're doing the same thing abroad. But no, now it's like they don't even need to pretend that they are fighting for justice here. And so you can guarantee that there is no justice overseas. And so this is the problem that we have here in the United States. And instead of trying to justify war, or try to find other ways to increase the size of your military so you can continue to prosecute unjust wars, undeclared wars, never-ending wars, we can just seek peace. Right. So that's it. That's why a draft is bad. It's coercive. And just as Ukraine is showing us, if you have an army full of coerced fighters, they're just going to surrender. And you're going to lose the war anyway. So why begin it in the first place? I will talk to you in the next episode.